entirely. Is Superman, being the post-crisis Superman, in my estimation, going to make a reference to his Luthor, having been an older man who was dying of kryptonite radiation, and so cloned himself and presented himself as his own son? It'd be kind of interesting to see, given that Superman's memories of the battle with Doomsday are still so fresh. Um, I don't know. We'll have to see. In terms of where else the post-crisis Lex Luthor, as depicted during the years 1986 through 95, reappeared, there are two uh, stories I can think of. One was in the 1998 Christmas themed story. It was a silent issue, and it was done by Dan Jurgens. It was very interesting because in that short story, Superman defeated this big giant robot that was rampaging through Metropolis, and Superman brought it back to LexCorp. And when he confronted Lex Luthor, readers saw that this was a Lex Luthor as he looked during John Byrne's Man of Steel 6-issue miniseries. So he was the plus size but balding Lex Luthor. He still had some red hair at the back and the sides. And I found it interesting that Jurgens decided to pull out that version of Lex Luthor for this story, because nothing else about the story suggested that this was a period piece. Maybe it was Jurgens just wanting to play in Byrne's sandbox a little bit. The other example of Lex Luthor II popping up was in the two-part Matrix Supergirl Convergence storyline, which took place, was it 3 years? Yep, 3 years ago now. Wow, how time flies. And in that two-part story, Lex Luthor II, with his flowing red mane of hair and red beard, and his then girlfriend, post-crisis Matrix Supergirl, oh, that was a mouthful, found themselves trapped in a zero-hour era, pre-zero-hour era city with a dome enclosing the city. Supergirl's powers were rendered inert. Superman was nowhere to be found, and so Lex II was in a deep funk, and he took out his anger, his displeasure with not being able to confront the Man of Steel on Supergirl. What bothered me about that story was the tone which writer Keith Giffen used. I've talked about this on the show before, but I'll mention it again. I find that Keith Giffen, ever since Justice League International, has had this real penchant for writing with the intent of putting the funny into the story. And I mean funny as in the blah-ha-ha type of funny. He and James DeMatteis, they'll both do this when they're working on newer books. But I find especially Giffen, he really wants to put in that silly sarcasm. And the reason why it didn't come off as true to me in this two-part miniseries was the fact that the whole time Jurgens and company were writing Lex Luthor II, they weren't playing it up for jokes. This was being taken quite seriously. And the whole purpose of these Convergence miniseries was to give readers a taste of stories from yesteryear. And so while a lot of the stories were written in the tone of the stories from the era in which they took place, this one didn't. I felt bad about that. Yeah, I get it. In a city where his girlfriend was powerless and where his arch rival was nowhere to be seen, eventually cracks would show in Lex II's armor. And yes, he would start speaking with a greater degree of anger, certainly venting on Supergirl, who was at his side constantly. But if Giffen had played it a little more seriously without the humor, I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. But I'm really thinking that that's it in terms of new stuff featuring the post-crisis Lex Luthor II. Anyways, the version that we've had of Lex Luthor for the past 20 plus years really works because they blended the pre-crisis and post-crisis elements so well into one cohesive being. We've seen with other characters, specifically like Hawkman, where different writers swing from one end of the pendulum. First, Hawkman is Kadar Hall, then he's Carter Hall, then he's Kadar Hall again, and maybe he's going to be Carter Hall after all. That creates a lot of confusion. It creates a muddled continuity. But when it comes to transitioning from the post-crisis Lex Luthor to Lex Luthor II, it was all very organic. The storytelling made complete sense. Stern and Jurgens picked up the baton from John Byrne, and while they did different things in their run, they still made sure to honor what came before and not say, okay, we're going to ignore all of that. We're going to take that into deep consideration going forward. So that's why I like to look back on this era of Superman. It's certainly fun to see how Superman has evolved over the last 30 years, but there's something to be said for how Byrne, Stern, Jurgens, and writers after have handled the development of Lex Luthor's character. So my song is sung on that topic. So just as a preview for episode 102, it's going to be titled The Curious Case of the Post-Crisis Supergirl, focusing on Supergirl primarily between the years 1986 through, I want to say closer to 1998. I may be off a little bit on that when I get doing some deeper research. But in terms of the post-crisis Supergirl's development, and in terms of how things have gone forward from the post-crisis Supergirl through to the pre-Flashpoint Supergirl, the New 52 Supergirl, the Rebirth era Supergirl, wow, DC has done a real roundabout way of reinterpreting the character. So episode 102, folks, could very well be a two-parter just like this one. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at comicsandhistory@gmail.com. You can also head on over to the Comics and History Facebook page, like the page, so that you can keep up to date, keep apprised of upcoming show topics and releases. Be great to get some feedback from you, my friends and listeners. So episode 102 will come your way in another 7 days from this episode's initial release. Until then, this class is dismissed.